I still remember the first day I went to Amicus's offices. My office was in Plainsboro. So when I went there, my heart was in my mouth, right, as I say, because as with a lot of people, I felt like, hey, am I an imposter? Do I have any business working in a finance team? And it was definitely very, very nerve wracking, right? But the one thing that I've always felt worked in my favor was I am self-aware enough to know that I'm not the smartest person in the room, but I always think I can compensate that by working hard. So what I did was, even before my first year at Amicus, I had spent close to 3 weeks researching all their 10K and Q documents, going through what their business was, what were the analysts thinking. So I had access through Wharton, I had access to few of the analyst reports. I read through them. So I had a fair idea of what are the burning questions, right? So I think preparation helped a little bit.
All right. Today's guest is Karthik Sriram, a biotech finance executive with more than 18 years of experience building the financial engines that power high-growth life sciences companies. He brings a rare dual perspective, biomedical engineering, combined with an MBA from Wharton School. That allows him to evaluate R&D through a commercial lens and translate complex scientific data into clear value creation strategy. He has helped secure more than $800 million in capital, extending cash runways, accelerating clinical pipelines, and positioning organizations for major partnerships and public market readiness. Today, he leads financial planning and analysis at Parabilis Medicines, a clinical stage biopharmaceutical company. Karthik, welcome to Inside Pharma Leadership. Happy to have you here.
It's awesome to be here, Keith. I'm looking forward to our chat.
Take us through a little bit of your background and how you've arrived at this time and space with a lot of the things you've had the opportunity to do.
Sure. As most people say, even though going from point A to point B seems like a straight line, life rarely works itself that way, and you always take a circuitous path with a lot of unintended and intended diversions. So my life is no exception to that cliche. So I ended up doing my bachelor's in engineering in India in the early 2000s. But just before I was going to go to college, my grandfather was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer, and he passed away before I started college. And this was a grandfather in India. Most families live with grandparents. So I was living with that grandfather, and it was pretty devastating to lose someone. That was my first kind of real instance of seeing someone that I know go through a protracted illness and pass away, and it really caused a lot of impact on me. At that age, I didn't appreciate the impact it had, but as I've gotten older, I think I've appreciated that impact more and more. So I wanted to be at the intersection of what I would call engineering and biology, and to me, my career path kind of followed that, right? So I did my bachelor's in electrical engineering, focusing a lot on biomedical instrumentation through my last 2 years. And then I ended up moving to the U 2005 to pursue my master's in biomedical engineering at University of South Florida. I focused on sensor development, and I worked on projects that involved figuring out novel sensing modalities to help Americans who are serving the country in our armed forces. So that gave me a different perspective of how, and it exactly put me where I wanted to be, right? Applying hard physics and engineering concepts to solve biological problems. So that's been the story in my life mostly. And then, after I finished my master's, I ended up working in process consulting, primarily helping pharma, biotech, and medtech companies improve their processes, kind of push that efficiency frontier to be operating at a higher level. But at some point during the journey, I was really moved to think about moving in-house into a pharma or biotech company. I see the level of efforts that these companies are putting in to improve patient life every day. And I know it sounds a little self-serving because I now work in the biotech industry, but I've seen so many scientists, right, who have simply unimaginable things in a good way, right? They've stretched themselves beyond what I would call human abilities to make sure that they met timelines, right? That they submitted the best data to the FDA. So it really kind of impacted me. Like, hey, there are so many people really trying to help patients all over the world. What can I do to kind of add to that, right? It's like there's a great fire. Can I be a little bit more of fuel to that fire? Was what was in my mind. And I did my MBA at Wharton primarily, with the goal of moving in-house into a biotech or a pharma company. And I usually believe when you really, kind of put in your heart and soul into something, I always believe the universe conspires to help you. And I think very similarly, during my BA, Amicus Therapeutics, which recently got acquired by Biomedical, the finance leadership there wanted someone to come in and help them with their long range plan. And they were not looking for a traditional finance person, right? What are the odds? But it so happened that they were looking for someone like me who had a lot of understanding of the what happens in the business, and then helping translate that into a financial model. So they kind of discounted the financial modeling abilities,
Mm.
but kind of put a premium on understanding the business. So that's how I got the job.
Let me ask you this quick question. What was that transition like? Because I know it's very different based on your background. Consulting and finance is literally a different animal relatively to your background, getting into what, at that point into your career. What was that like?
I'm going to lie to you if I tell you that I was all like prepared, and I walked in the first day thinking I'm going to like do an A+ job. I still remember the first day I went to Amicus's offices. My office was in Plainsboro, so when I went there, my heart was in my mouth, right, as I say, because as with a lot of people, I felt like, hey, am I an imposter? Do I have any business working in a finance team? And it was definitely very, very nerve wracking, right? But the one thing that I've always felt worked in my favor was I am self aware enough to know that I'm not the smartest person in the room, but I always think I can compensate that by working hard. So, what I did do was, even before my first year at Amicus, I had spent close to like 3 weeks researching all their 10K and Q documents, going
Mm.
through their
Okay.
what their business was, what were the analysts thinking. So I had access through Wharton. I had access to like few of the analyst reports. I read through them, so I had a fair idea of what are the burning questions, right? So I think preparation helped a little bit. But I also feel the thing that I was extremely fortunate was the team I walked into at Amicus were all uniformly high EQ people who basically felt like, hey, Karthik, we know it's natural to feel overwhelmed, but here is how we are going to help you get through your first month, right? So whether it was my manager or my CFO or my controller, they all kind of pulled together, and they basically, as I say, I stood on the shoulders of giants, right? They helped me get through that first month or month and a half. And usually, if you bring a good work ethic, you kind of show people that you're out to help, right? After that initial like getting to know you phase, if they know, hey, Karthik means well, and he's a guy with a good work ethic, then people automatically start opening up to you. And even if you say something stupid, right, like they will be like, okay, you know what, Karthik maybe has an off
Yes.
day. And I'm not gonna lie, having the Wharton logo on your resume does help you. So even if you say something outrageous, people are like, "Hey, could this be insightful because this is coming from someone at Wharton?" But I think that kind of free pass only happens like once or twice, right? And then you make more mistakes, then you kind of there's a slippery slope after that. But I think the combination of my own work ethic, my preparation, plus the people that are around me, I think allowed me to succeed in my initial days at Amicus.
That's great. I know that people that I've met from Wharton are pretty smart, and you all are very well connected. So I do know that it's a great network. You mentioned EQ. Tell me how important that's been in your work. I know that was something that we talked about earlier.
Yeah. So for me, finance is typically a job where, I would be lying to you if I tell you that if I walk into a room discussing budgets, people are happy to see me. Invariably, people are not happy to see me, right? Oh my God, this guy is here, he's going to ask us to cut something, right? That's what people feel. And I think it's natural, right? My job in the company is to save money, is to allow the company to make meaningful capital allocations, right? So given that, it's a 50-50, right? I'm going to say yes to certain things. I'm going to say, hey, this is maybe not the thing you want to invest in. That's just how it works, right? So I know that uh, that's the baseline. So I've always been focused on ultimately I need to work with you. So if you start out with saying like, hey, Karthik might want to cut my budget, that kind of puts you on the defensive, right? So I've always kind of thought that connecting with people, building relationships, and helping them understand where I come from will help me do my job better, right? And all of us at some level are selfish. We want to do our job better. We want to earn more. We want to get career progression. So in some ways, it's not that I'm a nice guy or I'm an altruistic person. I think in some ways it's self preservation. If I want to do my job well, I need to have great relationships with people I work with. I want them to trust me that I am not going to like ask them to do things that are against their interests or their business's interests. So So to me, EQ is as important as your hard financial skills in a role like mine.
Yeah, I know that a lot of data suggests that people that get ahead have a high level of emotional intelligence. I know most of the time when we're in school, we spend most of our time focused on IQ, but that emotional intelligence makes a huge difference. And one of the things you were talking about is convincing or having those conversations about CapEx. And I was reading something that you had written a couple of years ago, and I think this is relevant for those that are in marketing as well as people that you have startups and you're trying to build an organization. Talk a little bit about those differences between OpEx and CapEx and some of those differences and why both are important.
Sure. As my day job, I would tell you like around 80% of my time goes into operational expenses analysis, right? Because I think that is for a young biotech, biopharma company, that is a bulk of your spend. In a really early stage company, for the first 2 or 3 years, there is obviously a focus on CapEx because you need to set up the labs and you need to get, set up the equipment for people to keep working. That is important. But I think once you hit like the fourth or fifth year of your existence, then your operational expenses are basically what keeps you up at night, right? And opex comes in various buckets, right? There are things that people obviously recognize, right? Whether it's your rent or whether it's your lab supplies and whatnot. But there are also some other more bespoke things, right? Like, hey, I don't want to hire headcount, because a young stage biotech is super risky. I don't want to bring someone in house. I want to outsource this work, right? I want to use external contractors to do this. But that comes at a trade off, right? You have the agility to kind of reduce your resources quickly, but you are paying a premium for most contractors. So those are some of the nuances. And then obviously the other big thing is you get into clinical trials, and any of these clinical trials, a phase one clinical trial can cost you anywhere from like 20 million to like 100 million, depending on your the indication that you're going after, which is the disease that you're going after. The what does the comparative landscape look like? What is your therapy, right? Is it a complex gene cell therapy, or whether it's a small molecule? There are all these like levers that impact what that cost of your phase one trial can be, and it only gets more expensive progressively, right? Your phase two is not going to cost you less than phase one. Your phase three is not going to cost less than your phase two. So it's kind of stacking up your expenses, right? And if you don't initially know your foundation really well, as with any civil engineering problem, like if you keep stacking on something that already has a very loose foundation, you're going to set yourself up for failure. And similarly for capex, as I said initially, for a biotech company, there's a lot of emphasis on capex, whether it's setting out laboratories, setting up your facilities, and whatnot. And then you're basically sitting back and what we call break fix, right? You only account for things that break, that need to be fixed, calibrated. Those are the things that you really think about. But there are times where you do need to think about capex a little differently, right? Because someone will come to you and say, "Hey, Karthik, right now, the scientists are they are mixing these chemicals in this particular way. I'm kind of obviously not telling you like very complex stuff, but instead of doing this, if you get a robot that does that, it's going to save these scientists at least like 30 minutes a day, and that ends up with some savings overall, right? And those are like really tricky for you to consider because you are kind of straddling the opex. Your savings are in opex and your expenses are in capex. But I think those are some of the trade-offs that we think about as well, because ultimately we want our scientists to be doing creative, innovative work. Bogging them down with like manual stuff that really is not a value add is not what we want to do. And in those cases, we are happy to kind of think about the trade-off. And hopefully that answered your question.
Yeah, it does. It gives some context also because I think also with the technology, those type of things, you're weighing time, you're weighing money, you're weighing a lot of things versus doing things manually. So on one area you may be saving money, but the time is more valuable than money. So it's kind of the trade-off between those two items. Speaking of money, I know one of the things that you've been pretty successful at is raising capital. And I know that in other folks that I've talked to, that's always a challenge. What do you think are, if you were going to give one or two recommendations for people to raise capital, what would be your recommendations?
I can talk to you from a finance perspective, Keith, here, right? So usually when investors meet with companies, they know that the CEO is going to be a visionary, right? That's why they are the CEO. Their job is to kind of, show the investors what the upside rosy scenario is going to be, right? So they're always going to say, hey, we can do all of these things. This is how success is going to look like. So they usually kind of gravitate towards the finance person or the finance people in the room to keep them honest. Like, hey, I know that your management team is telling me all of these things, but the money I'm going to give you, what will it realistically buy me, right? And they always look at the finance people for that moment of truth. So I've always felt having a partnership with your senior leadership team where you can answer questions with investors honestly and tell them like, hey, these are these 10 things that we can do, but the money that you're going to give us is going to help us do the top three. These are the top three in my list, right? Because of A, B, and C. And doing those three really well will allow us to eventually do the other seven that we also want to do, right? And to me, kind of having that rational, logical, and honest relationship with investors where you're able to they are able to believe, hey, Karthik is telling me what is reasonable, right? I think that is rule number one. And number two, you need to know your business really well, because a lot of times, investors ask questions, right? Like, hey, how much does this cost you, right? Or what is a per patient cost for this phase 2 trial? And as a finance person in the room, you need to know your numbers really well. Again, I know this sounds very cliche, but it's easy to know, like, hey, how much are we spending on this program? How many people do we have? I think those are easier things for you to remember. But I think a lot of times the more tricky questions are knowing this per patient costs, or whether how much money is being like kind of locked in to manufacture a drug product. Those are things that investors really want to know, because that tells you like sunk cost versus what are things that are option. So having a really good idea of what's in your P&L, what are all the nuances that are there, I think those two definitely have been factors that have helped me have a good relationship with investors.
Okay. Yeah, that's good because it's one of the things I hear probably I'd say number 1 or number 2 is raising capital. And I think that it
Yeah.
can be a challenge.
See, and I also think there are some, what I would say, inherent advantages that I have that I think I underestimate them because I already have it, right? I also think the ability for you to understand the science. I don't think anyone outside the company is going to expect the finance leader to show up and basically wax eloquent about the technology, right? That's never going to happen. But they still want to know, like, hey, this guy knows what is happening in the company, right? Like, what are the challenges in enrolling patients, for example, meaningfulness of the slice of patient populations you're going after, right? Why is it high value? Kind of knowing those things. One of the CFOs I used to work with, Chip, who's now currently working at Popular Therapeutics, he really drilled that into me. He said, like, hey, as a CFO, you need to have a one-on-one conversation with an investor without it seeming like you're hitting a wall in terms of
Yeah.
what's happening in the company. And I think that's been easier for me because I have some scientific background, so I'm able to pick up the science better. But honestly, the last year, I've also seen that with all these AI tools that are available, right, you can basically read up on anything on the go. It's kind of amazing that last week I was reading about transcription factors, and then I was able to like read up on most of what would impact my job in like 45 minutes on a plane ride. So that's also democratized the ability for people to learn science quickly. Previously, you had to go like either buy a book and then read through it. But now with ChatGPT or Claude or whatever that is that you use, information has become much more easier and organized for us to find.
Yeah, it's interesting that on the commercial side, what we usually will tell commercial folks is the same thing. You need to understand the broad business, understand the science, but you should understand, what the CEO's thinking, where the business is going. Makes a big difference when you're talking to physicians and you're having those calls and those type of things wherever you are in the organization. So it runs literally on both sides. For you, it's understanding the science. For them, it's understanding a little bit more about the business and the numbers.
Absolutely.
So tell us a little bit about Parabilis Medicines and where you are in the marketplace. It sounds like from a focus on cancer. I know a lot of organizations are focused on cancer. What differentiates you guys, and tell us a little bit about that.
So we are a company that was spun out of Harvard University. There are many companies that come out. We are one of them. And our scientific platform is that we develop these alpha helices. We call them as helicons, and they have the ability to kind of penetrate through the cell, right? If you think about it, a lot of small molecules have inherent kind of disadvantages that they can't bind to certain targets, right? Because these targets, there is not enough binding sites with the right level of binding capability that you can have these small molecules bind and act on them. So we have this alpha helices that we can design with the right level of like, hey, I want something that's super soluble, but then it should have these binding sites. Right? So we can really think of this as an engineering problem. We can basically create this alpha helix for the exact purpose that we want. So that allows us to kind of create these molecules that are super tuned for the disease that we are trying to cure. That is our secret sauce, right? Again, I'm giving you the finance person perspective. If you speak to John Meggy, who's our technical founder, he will talk 30 minutes about this, right? I'm giving you the much easier version of it. So what this allows is that there are a lot of cancers and other diseases where we know, hey, this is what is causing the cancer, right? But we just don't have a way to address that root cause. So the first clinical candidate that we have, which is FOG001, we used to be called FOG Pharma Parabilis, so the product is still called FOG001. So that is basically a beta-catenin TCF4 pathway inhibitor. I know it's a bunch of jargon I'm throwing at you, but what it does is there are some cancers for which there is this particular biological pathway that causes the cancer, right?
Okay.
So earlier approaches to kind of doing this involved kind of stopping this pathway further downstream, right? Because they couldn't go into the cell. So what we are trying to do is stop this beta-catenin TCF4 pathway activation earlier on to inhibit that process, so we can have a more durable kind of response.
Okay.
And our second idea in the clinic, we don't have our second candidate in the clinic, but that's around prostate cancer as well, where I think a lot of the world is going towards a particular direction, but we are taking a couple of other different directions that have not been taken because the existing technology does not allow you to target, kind of target those particular sites. And we think that we can do a better job of it.
Okay. Tell us how AI is played within the context of developing products like this, whether it be clinical trials or just research in general.
So I believe where AI has had impact is, I think I know AI has been a hot word for the last 24 months, but even before that, I think there were tools that were helping people like incrementally, right? And then there's been this like sharp, S curve that's kind of started off on AI the last 24 months. I think a lot of AI tools that are out there are really helping us on what I would call the easier to model stuff, which is physics and chemistry, because those are all literal like empirical laws. You kind of have a good idea of what happens. And I think AI has really made a meaningful impact there. And I think it's not even, complicated when I say that, right? Because these are all, I'm assuming you've done some chemistry, in your life. There are a set of rules, and like, hey, when these two molecules interact, this is what happens, right? Those are all things that can be easily predicted. And there are other companies that are doing that. If you think about Schrodinger, there are these protein folding software that's been around for a while, right? I think that is where I think AI has supercharged things. So you can actually go through these like permutation and combinations much faster and much more accurately. I think where I think, again, as a non-scientist, I feel I still don't know how much AI is helping is around what I would call modeling biological reactions, right? I think that has always been much more trickier because I believe as human beings, we don't understand completely how our human body works. And then you're trying to build a model with incomplete data. So anytime you're trying to do that, that model is basically going to like learn with every iteration. Right? I think that is what is happening. But having said that, I do see there are companies that are out there in the market that are telling me like, hey, we can solve some of the simpler biological problems. And I see that if you look at like companies like Recursion or other companies that are doing these things, they are getting candidates into the clinic much faster. So I do believe that there is a lot of what I would say actual evidence that AI is helping us. Where this will go into the future, I can tell you on the finance side, a lot of things that used to be very manual or if effort intensive are going to be much more simpler, right? So whether it's to do with your controllership business, understanding your accruals, understanding your accounts receivables and payables, I think there's going to be a lot more automation there. And recently I spoke to one of the, biotech VC community member, and that person basically said, hey, there's a future where we might see like a finance organization for an early stage biotech be like one or two people, and that's it. Like rest of it is either like AI tools or outsourced. I don't think we are there ready to go there yet, but
Yeah.
I think that's where the finance future is going. But I also think on the research side, recently I went to a networking event where someone said they were developing these assays on a chip where you could do some of these in vivo experiments that we are doing. Currently, it costs you a lot of money to do those experiments, but they were saying they were leveraging some AI and proprietary models to kind of do this on a chip. at like close to like one fifth the cost. I'm yet
And
to see where what is the outcome of it, but the fact that people are even thinking about it tells me that
yeah,
we are gonna get there in maybe like 5 to 6 years. And I think that's what the FDA is also saying now, right? If you look at all, I know that FDA is now a buzzword, like there's a news about them every day. But if you see what they spoke about, like antibody therapies, they basically said, like, you don't have to do all the primary testing every time. If you can tell me, like, hey, there is a credible path that this is going to be safe, I'm okay. I don't want you to repeat all the experiments every time. So I think the world is slowly moving towards a direction. Is it going to be in a year? No, but maybe in 5 years, it's going to be significantly more efficient.
yeah, I would agree with you. I would say on the clinical side, when it comes to AI and machine learning, been way ahead of the curve because my guess is people weren't calling it that. I remember when we were running training, we would send the reps to see the R&D folks on the last day of training, and so they were already using the tools with the molecules showing how you pull different things apart, and that was years ago. So it's advanced so
Correct.
much, and the AI that we see now is more, I call it everyday stuff, business stuff, things like finance, sales, CRM systems, those type of things. We weren't seeing that then, but scientists were using a lot of those tools already. So it is fascinating, and everything's accelerating so fast. When we talk about tools and just in general, where do you see the biggest challenges that you're having within your organization that you would love to be able to fix by the end of the year?
Around AI, you mean, or generally tools?
Just in general.
My primary kind of crib has been that most of the tools that are being sold to biotech companies, right, are basically sold to you on a usual licensing model. And I think what that does is it creates a lot of pressure on the people who are actually, asking for these tools to feel, oh my God, I don't want to ask Karthik for like, whatever 400K because it's a lot of money, right? I'm actually thinking if the pricing model that these tool like these AI software companies, if they can come up with a value-based pricing where like, hey, initially we start you off with this money, and why don't you use the application? And once you start seeing the returns, we can start charging you more, right? I think that way it's easier for the business to make the case to me right now. And I think that is preventing us from quickly adapting or adopting new tools faster because there is this initial like kind of high bar
Sure.
for you to get the tool in even before you can evaluate them, right? To be fair, a lot of these companies also offer you a demo saying like, hey, you know what, you can use a demo for 1 month. But the amount of time I've done these demos in the past where I've taken a system and I've tried to like do things on my own, you really don't get a good sense because it requires like so much setup and for you to
Right.
have the data in a particular way which you don't know. And then more often than not, you're like, hey, I don't, for the cost, I don't think I'm going to get value, right? And then they show the demo and they're like, oh my God, there are so many things I could have done. I just didn't know.
Right.
So,
Yeah, it's like
so I
using a
think that
platform online, where they say, "We'll give you a demo," and then not only do they only give you like maybe 20 or 30% of its usability, so it doesn't help you there either because you don't get the whole suite of tools.
No, and this is not a simple problem, right? Because if it was, they would have solved it already. But I think there's got to be a way where you can onboard these small biotech companies early, right? And again, to me, the use of a software or a efficiency tool is much more when the company is an early stage company, right? Because then you're preventing them from hiring a lot of people. So if you didn't hire 10 people in your finance team, the value of an automated like closing tool that you have is much more. But the problem is early stage companies don't have as much cash to give out, right? So it's kind of a chicken or egg problem. If they can use these tools earlier on, then they might not even build large organizations and they will continue to work very efficiently and they'll be more receptive to new tools.
No, it makes perfect sense. Now, this might seem like a silly question, but I have to ask it because I was working on a project and the company, well, it was during COVID. And so a lot of finance teams generally in the past would do closings. You had to physically be together, and then companies figured out how to do it virtually. Now companies are asking people to come back into the office. I guess what are your thoughts around just being able to close the books? Do you feel like people really need to be together, or does it make a difference?
I think it's ultimately a team thing, right? Like how is the team that you have in your company? How do they work together? Ultimately, that decides it. Can everything be done virtually? Absolutely, yes, right? I actually worked on an IPO that was completely remote during COVID, right? So if you can do an IPO completely virtually, I'm pretty sure you could do your monthly or quarterly close or even an annual close virtually, right? But I also think ultimately, this is not like a one size fits all. Teams that have different dynamics, right? And I think at some level, finance teams are extremely benefited by at least interacting with the business in person at some level, right? I don't think being in the office every day is helpful. At the same time, not being in the office at all is also not helpful, right? There's a golden path somewhere in between, because ultimately, for a small company, your finance team is kind of your nerve center, because they interact with every department and they know what's happening everywhere, and ultimately they know exactly how much money you're burning through, right? So at some level, being in person is helpful, but is that super critical for you to close your books or kind of keep yourself compliant? I don't think so. I think all our lives have kind of morphed after COVID, right? Before COVID, no one knew any other life than going to the office 4 or 5 days a week, leaving at like whatever, 8 in the morning, coming back at 6. No one had a different kind of idea about it. But now I think all our lives have changed. We're all, playing these work and being, a parent, and we are playing all of these roles. So I think it's a more topical question now. And given that, and if you hire the right people, you empower them with the right tools and right authority, you have to trust that they will make the best use of their time.
Yeah, makes perfect sense. I think the flexibility piece is really a big piece of that. Switching gears a little bit, I know that you spent a lot of time with entrepreneurs. I know you've been highly active with the Wharton School. I believe you're the New Jersey president for the Wharton chapter. Is that correct?
Correct. I was lucky enough to be selected to be the president of the Wharton Club of New Jersey this year, and to me, I've gotten so much from the Wharton community that it is in some ways this is a little bit of what I can do for the club and for the community. And you're right, we did have an entrepreneurship pitch workshop or a pitch showcase that we did last month, which was really well attended, and it was a great event. It was great to see so many people kind of putting their life's work on the line, right, and telling us what they've done. I generally feel that given the world that we live in, we hear a lot about things that are not working, and rightly so, right? I don't think everything is working for everyone, and a lot of people are, surmounting a lot of challenges. But I think it also comes at the cost of us not knowing all the great things that people are doing. Events like this kind of help you like notice, like, hey, my God, this guy's done this for 10 years, and look at what he's done, right? I think it's a fantastic kind of perspective to have.
Very good. Well, Karthik, I really appreciate you spending time with me. Where can we find you?
So I'm on LinkedIn. So I'm on linkedin.com/Karthik Sriram. And I'm also on Twitter with at Karthik Sriram underscore, what used to be called Twitter, now X.com. So those are the two places that I'm on social media. And then on email, you can always look me up on the Wharton Club of New Jersey website. I have my contact information is there. And if you want my Parabilis email address, it's ksriram@parabilismed.com.
Thank you so much. Thanks for joining us on Inside Pharma Leadership.
Thank you so much. Have a wonderful day. Stay warm.